Hello everyone, so today's video is going to be in a slightly different tone I guess to some of my other videos because I realised a month or so ago I've never really spoken in length about those books that I just don't like. So obviously it's really fun to talk about books that I love and perhaps not so fun to talk about those books that I don't love, and I always feel that as a booktuber I'm supposed to be recommending books to you guys, but I thought it would be really fun to talk about those books that I just don't like and the reasons why I don't like them and stuff like that. So all of the books I'm going to talk about in this video are quite popular on some level, so I'm not going to say that they are bad books per se, but certainly when I read them, at the time that I read them, I just didn't really enjoy them for whatever reason. So some of these books you will know that I don't like because I know I've mentioned them in previous videos, but some of these books I know I've never mentioned on my channel because even though I've read them, I just don't really feel that they are worthy of me talking in any great length about. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the final book in a very popular YA dystopian trilogy, and I am a massive fan of both of the first two books in this trilogy, and that is Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. This is of course the third and final book in the Hunger Games trilogy, and I just felt that this was really rushed. I feel so much more could have been done with it. Several things happened that I felt could have been dealt with in a lot more detail and they were just skimmed over, and indeed when I saw parts 1 and 2 of the Mockingjay films, so much happened in those films that I just couldn't remember whether they'd happened in the book as well because they just weren't dealt with in any detail. I do think Mockingjay is a lot better as a film than as a book because obviously it's a lot more immersive, you can actually see it happening, it's a lot more exciting. I also don't like how it was always a question of who Katniss was going to end up with, not whether she'd end up with anyone. It was always going to be either Gale or Peter. It was never even considered that she may do great stuff by having some time by herself, and I do think that she definitely is the kind of girl who would have thrived with some alone time, and I don't think realistically she would have been happy to settle into a very quiet, reserved life. So those are just some of the issues that I have with Mockingjay as a book. The next one I'm going to talk about you will know that I don't like because I know I've mentioned it in several of my previous videos, and that is 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James. This is of course the first book in the Shades of Grey trilogy, and this is the only book in this trilogy that I've read because I just couldn't read any more after I'd finished it. Obviously I have a huge problem with the dangerous abusive relationship that it's romanticising. I think that it portrays sexual adventure in a really negative light. I don't like the very clunky writing style. I just hate the writing style of E.L. James, really dislike it. Also I was really frustrated by Anna as a character because I started off this book really liking her and really relating to her, and then she made some terrible decisions that I just couldn't get on board with. I didn't understand why she made those decisions, and yeah, those are just some of the reasons why I didn't really like 50 Shades of Grey. Connected to 50 Shades of Grey, which of course started out as a fan fiction for Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. When I read this book I was about 17 and Twilight was massive. All of my school friends were reading it and loving it, and I heard that it had vampires in, and I'd already read some vampire books by that point. I'd read Dracula, I'd read Salem's Lot, and I was already terrified of vampires. So I went into this expecting to be terrified by these vampires. Instead, I got this very good looking, very lovely high school boy, and I forgot that he and his friends and family were supposed to be vampires at several points during this book, which I don't think was supposed to happen. I didn't like Bella from the offset. I thought she was very wishy-washy, incredibly frustrating, and again I didn't like the very clunky writing style. I really don't like Stephenie Meyer's writing style at all. I think she's a terrible writer, but those are just some of the reasons why I didn't like Twilight. The next one I want to talk about is Allegiant by Veronica Roth. This is the third and final book in the Divergent trilogy, and I think I have said before on my channel that I do think the Divergent trilogy should have been a standalone because I think the first book is really good and then it just goes downhill from there. I forgot so much of what happened in Allegiant literally a week after I'd finished reading it. I've remembered the climax though because I just did not see any reason for that happening at all. I think it was just thrown in there for shock value. And yeah, I just really didn't like it. I don't think this book ever should have been written. I think if you have read the first book in the Divergent trilogy, just stop there because it doesn't get any better. So yeah. The next one I want to talk about is The Fifth Wave by Rick Yancey, and this is a YA sci-fi dystopian where supposedly evil aliens are imminent and they are going to come to Earth and basically destroy the human race. And I was expecting this to be very atmospheric, very immersive. I was expecting to be constantly on edge, and I was constantly waiting for that point where I would feel scared, and it just never came. I was just never invested in it. I just didn't care about the characters. I thought the romance was very predictable and I just didn't like it. I don't know whether that's to do with the writing style. It may have been, and I have heard that the second and third book in this trilogy are not as good as the first one. So if I'm not going to like the first one, of course I'm not going to continue with the rest of the series. So yeah, I've heard that the film really isn't all that great either. So yeah, really not a fan of the fifth wave. The next one I feel is probably going to be quite controversial in me saying that I didn't like it, but that is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I was expecting to be so much more emotionally involved in this story than I was. Essentially, this is about a patriarchal society and misogyny and being a servant, a female servant in that world, and how they find little pockets of happiness and empowerment and stuff like that. But I just didn't care enough. I just couldn't connect to the characters. I was quite bored for most of the story. I have read another Margaret Atwood book called Alias Grace, which I think they're making into either a film or TV show, and I really loved Alias Grace so much. So it hasn't completely put me off Atwood, so I would definitely love to read some more of her books. I do have a couple more of her others, and I haven't seen any of the Handmaid's Tale TV show, which I have heard really good things about, so maybe I will give that a watch. Maybe I will give this a reread now I'm a little bit older as well. Maybe I will enjoy it and appreciate it a little bit more, but at the time that I read it I just couldn't get into it at all, found it very boring. So yeah. The next one I want to talk about is Life of Pi by Yann Martel. Again, I found this really dull in several places. There were huge chunks of description that I just really found it hard to get through. There was a whole chunk quite near the beginning of the book about religion and stuff like that, and I'm just not interested. I just wanted to get on with the story. I wanted more to happen. I really love the film though. It's a stunning film visually, beautiful film, and I really like the ending of this book as well, because there's sort of like a little mystery twist at the end where you don't really know whether what we've seen is exactly what happened or whether something completely different happened, and I really liked that aspect of it. But for most of it I was just really bored, and not all that much happens anyway, but I just wanted to feel a little bit more than what I did for this book. So yeah. The next one, again, might be quite controversial by me saying that I didn't like it, but that is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And I've actually read this book twice, and both times, even though it's quite a little book, it took me a long time to get through, because I just find Fitzgerald's writing style really dense and hard to tap into. Also, I do find Daisy very frustrating as a character, and I find the romance quite contrived and not like a natural progression of a relationship, if you know what I mean. I do really like the film, yet again though, the Baz Luhrmann film with Leo DiCaprio in it, absolutely stunning visually, really enjoyed that. But The Great Gatsby, as I said, I've read it twice because I really wanted to like it. It's one of those books I really want to like, but I just don't for some reason. So I don't know, maybe I'll give it another go at some point, but yeah, we will see. So yeah. The next one I want to talk about is House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski, and when I went into this I'd heard so many people say that it's amazing and that it's life-changing and that it will mess with your head and you will never ever forget it. It's supposed to be like a horror thriller book, so it sounded exactly like my sort of thing on paper, and I went into it really excited. It's quite a big book and it took me ages and ages to get through. I invested so much time in this book, so I was just waiting for that moment where I would be terrified, but at the end of the day I was too confused to be scared, because I love being scared and I love being confused, but I need some sort of coherence, if you know what I mean, and I just couldn't grab onto any of that in this book, unfortunately, and I was just too confused to feel anything other than confusion. And maybe that is what it's supposed to do, but I was expecting some kind of terror. I was expecting some kind of miracle moment where I would be like, this is the greatest book ever, like so many people are about this book, but it just never came for me. So yeah. And the last one I want to talk about is Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, and I had to read this as part of my uni English literature course, so maybe that ruined my enjoyment of it somewhat, but this is a story of a guy on a boat telling his crewmates about the time when he went to Africa and he discovered that African people, so essentially black people and white people, are actually not all that different. And obviously this was written at the turn of the 20th century, so I guess it is quite ahead of its time in terms of people's attitudes and things like that. But it just kind of felt like, yeah, I know that black people and white people aren't all that different, that's a given, and obviously we're supposed to read it as somebody of that time, but the writing style was just so dense. And I do love classics, I love books that are a lot older than this, and I don't find the writing style a problem, but I just couldn't get into Conrad's style at all, and I just found it really dull. Even though it's really little, I just wanted more things to happen. I wanted to believe that this was this wonderful, powerful, revolutionary book that so many people say that it is. But yeah, I just couldn't get past the dense writing style or the kind of dull redundancy of it. So yeah. And that is it for those popular books that I just didn't really enjoy. What are some popular books that you really like? Please let me know. As I said, all of these books, they do have certain fan bases, so if you choose to read them, then you may enjoy them. Just because I didn't doesn't mean that you won't too. I will leave all of my social media in the description down below. I hope you're having an awesome day, and I will see you very soon for another video. Bye bye.